Hello, welcome to Hey Listen. I'm Leslie Greer, and I'll be your host. Today we're going to talk about issues related to deaf women, how we've been oppressed, and the criticisms that we've endured. We'll talk about issues that are related to racism and prejudice against minorities, but today we're going to focus on deaf women. Now I'd like to switch over to have a break from our commercial, and we'll be right back. Now, our guests for today are three deaf women. We have Barbara Ray Holcomb, Thelma Bohli, and Mindy Hopper. First, I'd like to ask you about the title that you prefer, Ms. or Mrs. You know that men have the choice of Mr., but what do you prefer?
I think it's a simple answer. I prefer Ms. And the reason is that men are called Mr. whether they're married or not. And they can be recognized as such. So I prefer Ms. so I can be independent.
And what about you, Thelma?
Well, I've always been called Mrs., and I guess I'll just stick with that. But if someone called me Ms., I don't think I'd mind too much.
So you think that it's been a tradition to use Mrs. and you'll stick with that?
Yeah, it doesn't really matter to me.
Okay, how about you, Mindy?
Well, I agree with Barbara Ray. I prefer to be addressed as Ms. It's a more neutral form of address, and I'm liberated. And if you call me Miss, I feel like you're speaking to me like I'm a little girl, and I resent that. So I prefer Ms. It's just my way of thinking.
So you think that Miss is a bit degrading, makes you feel like a kid?
Yes, I'm a mature adult, and I prefer to be addressed as Ms. I'm liberated.
I'd like to talk about the book that Barbara's mother-in-law wrote. Your mother-in-law's name is Mabs Holcomb, and the book is called Deaf Women. Barbara, could you tell us a little bit about the book?
Yes. The book just recently came out, and it was written by my mother-in-law, Mabs S. Holcomb, and by another woman who is also deaf, Sharon K. Woods. Well, she is a teacher at Gallaudet College. A teacher, yes, at MSSD, which is Model Secondary School for the Deaf. The two of them have been involved in many different conferences. And there were women there that had never met a deaf woman that they could look up to as a role model, as an officer in a position of authority or involved in any other kinds of jobs of those natures. Well, they were asked and invited to give a workshop. And it was like, a workshop for deaf women? It was like they were kind of at a loss. That was in 1976, approximately that time. And they gave the workshop, and there was a woman there, Sally Umbach. She was from New York, and she had written a book and had distributed to younger women, to kids, so that they have someone to look up to. Now that was back. It wasn't, it was those people in the past. They wanted to feel proud, so they decided to develop self-esteem, to improve in that, not feel depressed or oppressed as if they couldn't do things. So they came up with the idea to encourage deaf women and deaf younger women to be proud of their deafness. So they added women, deaf women, because that's you're not only deaf, you're a woman. So it's like a double handicap, and we didn't like that term handicap, so...
Right. What could be a word used for that?
A minority, a group. You're a woman. There's such minority groups like blacks.
So you think maybe women are like a minority because we're inferior than
Well, they're
men?
under that category or classification.
And there's another book that's being written, a sequel.
Yes, there's a follow-up. There were so many people and so many submissions that they had to edit it down and eliminate a lot of the submissions, and so they're going to follow up with a next book. So any of you that have any comments, stories that you'd like to submit and be involved, those of you that are officers in an organization, it doesn't matter what that you would like to show, go ahead and send it in, because we want to inspire younger deaf women.
And the authors went and gave workshops after they wrote the book, isn't that right, about deaf women? And before that time, there were no conferences for deaf
That's
women.
right.
How do you think the idea of such a conference came to be?
I remember vaguely there was Women's Lib was going on. That movement was encouraging women, and we saw that likeness, feeling akin to them as women and being deaf, and we had a workshop to help women. In assertiveness training, deaf women needed that, and they felt like, we were passive. In growing up at schools for the deaf, we'd never learned how to be independent and assertive for ourselves. So we had a workshop to encourage that in our younger women, so that they'd feel more assertive and to be able to speak out.
Thelma, would you like to comment on what Barbara's been saying?
Well, regarding the workshops and assertiveness training, I remember back in about 1975, there was an Eastern Regional Conference that included Washington, D.C. and Massachusetts. And this conference addressed the topic of assertiveness training. And then some deaf women decided that we need that within the deaf women's community as well. So we decided that we would get some going in other places. Rochester had one.
What was the name of the conference that was held?
Assertiveness training. It was a workshop.
And who was the presenter?
There was a woman who ran it. Her name was Harriet Royer. And she's a counselor here in Rochester. And there was another woman, a hearing woman involved, but I don't remember her name.
Mindy, have you been to conferences for deaf women?
Well, women's conferences I have been planning to attend, but I haven't attended any yet. I do plan to attend one next spring in Washington, D.C.
Well, it was sponsored by the NAD. That's an organization for that included deaf women. And they invited Galloway, who was a woman, who was chosen, and then there was another one, Vicki Hurwitz. A third one was Sharon K. Wood, who is now presently the author of this book. And this organization has expanded and includes many deaf women. And it's just becoming stronger and stronger as an organization.
The Women's Lib movement started in about the 1960s, isn't that right?
About
76.
70s.
What were you doing during that time? Do you remember the movement that happened during the 60s and 70s? Thelma, you just made a face. Or Mindy, what were you doing at that time?
At that time, I was in high school, and I was a very oral student, and so I really missed a lot of the women's movement and what was going on with women's lib. Later on, after talking with people, I did learn what actually happened back in the 70s, and I related it to some incidences that happened in high school. Like, there were so many men's sports team, and there weren't that many women's sports team. And so we kind of used women's lib to sort of help us get equal rights for women's teams. But at that time, it was actually going on. I was unaware of what was actually happening because I was so oral.
And you were new. You were new to everything that was going on because you were young.
Yes,
Do you
I
remember
was.
what happened, Barbara?
I remember I was at a school for the deaf, and there was no explanation of what was going on. So we were isolated in this school for the deaf. I had absolutely no idea what was going on. When I got to college, it was like, ooh. And, I didn't know about all of these things. I was very, very passive as a person in college. Still remain so to a degree. And then I became involved in student activities. And that forced me to come out a little bit, but even more so was theater. Bob Panera was a teacher at the time and saw me and said that I was a very clear signer and encouraged me to go to NTD, National Theater for the Deaf Summer Program, as an actress. And I'm like, me? I had absolutely no confidence in my ability to, act on stage. But I accepted it and went for the training in the summer. And when I came back in the fall, and from then on, I was very involved in theater and was much more capable at communicating, I felt, in the community and elsewhere. 2 weeks ago, a month ago, I was looking for another deaf woman to be involved in the panel here. And the name Thelma Bohli popped up, and I asked her, and she said, oh, no way. So I thought, give it a break, and we'll try and convince her later. So she was in the theater production Great Expectations recently. Just after that, she had stage fright that she had to overcome. So I got her just recently. I said, would you mind being on as a guest? I said, we'd do it together. And she finally acquiesced and said, sure, she would do it. So she had to overcome that, and become braver.
And so you accepted, Thelma.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to ask you, why did you hesitate a bit there?
Well, when Barb asked me, I recalled that 2 years ago I had been asked to be on a panel on Hey Listen, and that was the very first show they did, and at that time I refused adamantly because I was terrified to be in front of people like that. And that is one reason why I did decide to get involved with theater, because I thought maybe that would help me overcome my stage fright.
And has it overcome your stage fright?
Well,
in the process.
But when women's lib first started to get popular, I really didn't think that it was for me, because I thought it's mostly for single women, and here I was, married and happily married and with a family, and I didn't understand what all the rebelliousness was about.
Excuse me, we're going to take a break now to hear from our sponsors, and then when we're finished with the commercial, we'll be right back and hear some more of these women comments. Please stay tuned. We'll be right back to Hey Listen. like to continue with the discussion that we were having before we took our commercial break. Thelma, you weren't finished. What were you saying?
Yes. In terms of women's lib, I was a homemaker myself, and I was very satisfied with that position in life. And I didn't really understand why other women weren't satisfied with their lives. But as I read more and more, I became more clear as to why people were rebelling.
So you must have been bothered by the movement.
Well, yeah. Yeah, it was a little irksome, I guess.
I have something I'd like to add to what Thelma and Barbara said about overcoming stage fright. Something that's parallels in my life. When I was in 4th grade, I transferred to a public school, and I had a question for myself, and it was, can I? Because I like to play sports with the boys. I really loved sports and playing, and I really wanted to play, but I didn't know if I should. I mean, I was a girl and everything after all. But the PE teacher was a woman, and she was a real role model for me at that time, and she encouraged me a lot. She said it didn't matter if I was deaf or hearing. If I wanted to participate, and it didn't matter if you were male or female, to just jump right in. And so my confidence really grew, and I decided to play, and I guess after a while I became the boys' best friends, and I kind of helped their team to win all the time.
Ah, I see. Did you play better than the boys? And how did the boys feel about that?
Well, I didn't always play better. I did play well. I played as well as or better than some and not as well as others. It, really depended.
So if you were better at some of those boys, did it bother them?
Well, in the beginning, I think they were a little surprised. I remember the first day in my public school, in gym class, the boys picked me last, and I think it was probably because I'm deaf. And they didn't know me. And so after I got on the team and we played for a while, they realized that I knew what I was doing. And after that, they picked me first because they knew I was good.
Were there other girls who weren't being chosen first, or do you mean you were the only girl who was chosen last? Do you know what I mean? Were you the only girl who was left to be chosen?
Well, I was one of the last few girls that were picked.
And you think it was because you were deaf?
Yes. Because I was new to this school and they really didn't know me. I mean, they knew the other girls from, second, first, and third grade, and I was new to this school, so they knew nothing about me.
You were the new kid.
So they picked me last. And I think it's because I was deaf. But then later, after I showed them what I could do, they realized my skill, and from then on, I think I was always one of the first picked from then on. It's interesting because obviously I had to prove myself.
That's right. I guess when they realized that you did have some talent in sports, then they started to pick you first. And is that when the boys were bothered by it?
Well, I remember they called me tomboy for a while, and that was okay by me. I really didn't care. It really didn't bother me any.
Barbara, what about you? Did you play sports when you were younger?
Oh, yes, I played volleyball. I was involved in basketball. Well, actually, those two were the only ones that were offered at the school for the deaf. They didn't have any varsity teams. At my time, in 1971 at RIT, they started to set up like varsity, quasi-varsity. It wasn't a formal team. There were 3 of us that had been from my same high school. And we were pretty dynamite volleyball players, and there were 3, 4, 5 other, hearing women, and we challenged other women from different colleges. The 3 of us felt that we were kind of left out at times because of the other hearing women. There were no interpreters used at that time, absolutely none.
Wow.
So the 3 of us were on our own, and we would help each other and be real supportive of one another. The other hearing women didn't really make an effort to learn sign at all.
And Thelma, were you also involved in sports? Did you play on any teams or? Oh, you were on the first string and played. Oh, wow, that's good, Barbara. And Thelma, what was your experience in sports?
Well, I too was one of the top players.
Good.
I played volleyball and basketball and baseball. But I'm not sure if you all know that in my time, when we played basketball, the girls only used half the court. We didn't use the full court going back and forth like the boys did.
They didn't go all the way back and forth on the court?
No, it was very different than now.
Oh.
We were restricted to one half of the court. And it made it seem kind of easy compared to nowadays. They go back and forth running all over the place.
So do you think using full court is a little bit too tough, huh? What do you think, Barbara? Wow, just having a half court is too simple.
Well, yeah, in volleyball there were 9 players. In basketball, you had 2 rovers that would go end to end, full court. These were called rovers, and it was their responsibility to run the length of the court and shooting. And then you would have an offensive and a defensive team, and then they switched it to 5, that would stay. So you would just receive the ball and shoot it if you were at the one end of the court. In volleyball, it was the same. Back in my time, there were 9 players, 3 rows of 9, 3 rows of 3. So there would be 9 players. And then they changed it my senior year to 6.
6, right.
Yes, it was much better because with 9 players, you just kind of stayed around, did absolutely nothing.
Yes,
you did it once
boy,
in a while.
I agree with you. I remember. I do remember when it was like that.
It was funny.
Do you want to add anything, Mindy, now that we're talking about sports? What were you involved in?
Well, I played so many sports, badminton, swimming, diving. I played so many. But I would like to add one thing that I remember from high school. There were so many men team sports, varsity teams, but there were only 3 women teams. Well, there was 2 or 3 women sports, and that was all. And I just didn't understand it. And the women's teams were really good. We always had winning seasons. But the men, well, they had 1 or 2. Maybe the soccer team had a winning season, and that was it. Like the football team and the wrestling team, they always lost. So I thought we should have more women's teams, and I made a proposal to set up some women's teams. And they said, fine, you need 100 girls' signatures. So we did that and gave it to the school board. But the administration or whoever, they didn't approve it. So we wrote it again, this time we included Title IX, which is a law for equal rights for women's sports, and we sent it back to the school board, and this time they did approve it, and I guess they sort of had to, and they set up a women's basketball team when I was in high school, and it's kind of sad because that was started when I was a senior in high school.
Oh, that's awful. Wow.
Oh, that's so good.
Yeah, but I'm kind of happy because they have it now, and now they've added other sports like soccer and other women's teams. And I think maybe if I hadn't started it then, maybe they wouldn't have had a basketball team until much later. So I really believe if you have dreams or goals, you should go for it.
So you made it possible for those to follow. What do you think about all the men's sports that are on television? And there's very few women involved in any sports on TV.
Oh, that really gets to me.
It's discrimination.
Yes, obviously it's discrimination. It's really not fair. And I really think that women's sports can be more exciting to watch even more than men. For example, I play softball every Thursday night right here in Rochester, and we have some really fierce competition. And I see all the old men and women sitting up there in the bleachers watching us, and they tell me they really enjoy watching us, even more than the men's Red Wing baseball team. And I find that really hard to believe, I can't believe that women can be so fascinating to watch.
So you think that the men to come watch you play softball think, wow, these women must be really tough, masculine, almost like you just lose your femininity because you're out there playing baseball?
No. Some of the women are very feminine, and boy, they are really good at this. I mean, their skill in baseball is unbelievable. It really doesn't matter. Many are kind of tough, yes, but there are some of the women who are very feminine and still really play well.
So it proves feminine women can also have talent.
Right.
That's true. Okay. So now we're finished talking about sports, and I would like to ask you about, how about a job interview situation? Suppose that you were applying for a job for an administration position, and after reading the job description, you apply for it, and you find out that also 2 men have applied. One is deaf and one is hearing. You also find out that another hearing woman has applied. Who do you think would tend to be chosen for the job?
The man, of course. It's a man's world.
You think it's a man's world?
Well,
do you think it'd be a deaf man or a hearing man?
That's my view, that it's a man's world. But, I would say that.
What about you, Mindy?
I really think it depends on the position, like a secretarial position. Do you think they would pick a man for that? I really don't think so. So that could be discrimination against men in that situation. But I think they would pick a woman, probably hearing first, because of the phone call skills necessary. I think it depends on the position.
That's true. Well, what about, now in secretarial schools there are typing classes, and a lot of men are taking those classes. What do you think about that? Is that going to cause a problem for the future of women? Is that going to mean that our possibility for jobs will be taken away?
Well, I think that because, as I was growing up in high school, they would give you these tests or questionnaire surveys about your job interest, and you were supposed to indicate what those were, and they'd have listed beautician, artist, all kinds of women's work. And that kind of influenced my decisions because, I looked to this paper as the limit of my choices. And I'm sure that if it was more open, I have a 4-year-old daughter now. And the opportunities now that are listed of what she can become when she grows up, pilots and, all of these different types of lawyers. So the kinds of jobs, there's a myriad of them as to what she wants to become. So I think that internal thing that we house as we grow up, those kinds of jobs that we can get are not going to be given to my daughter. That generation is going to have much more choices as to what they want to become when they grow up.
That's right. Do you want to add anything, Thelma?
Well, in my time when I was going to college, Gallaudet at that time was the only college for deaf people, and the course offerings for women were very limited at that time. We could only become a librarian or a library scientist or an educator, a teacher, teach PE or home ec, but there were very limited opportunities in those days. Right now, the horizons have grown quite a bit for women in general, and I think deaf women have more opportunities as well.
That's right. Okay, we're going to pause for a commercial break. Don't go away. We'll be right back with Hey Listen. Okay, I'd like to continue with some more questions. Let's talk about Deaf Women of Rochester, an organization. Could you explain about that? What is DWR?
Well, DWR is a support group that was established by 4 deaf women. Their names are Vicki Hurwitz and Sally Taylor and Joan Dixon and Pam Hatch. Now, how it all began was in the early 70s, I guess. A group of homemakers who had children would sometimes get together and have lunch or share the news or talk about what's going on in our lives. And when we heard about what was going on with this. This was a group of hearing women that did this on a regular basis, and when the deaf community got wind of what was going on, we thought we should have something like that. We need a support group in Rochester, and so we established DWR, the Deaf Women's of Rochester. And at that time, there were about 100 members, but now it's increased a great deal. The group has grown to about 300. And we offer workshops, and the variety of services that we've incorporated have grown. Well, like we were talking before about assertiveness training, we do that sometimes.
And wellness.
What?
Wellness.
Oh,
it's like nutrition, information, different kinds of advice.
Right, nutrition.
So you offer a variety of topics.
Mm-hmm, yes, we do.
And do the members pay?
Well, we are now affiliated with another organization. It's called the Women's Health Resources, and that's based at Highland Hospital. They offer a variety of workshops there on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, and they have a mailing list of people in DWR, and they always let us know when events are happening related to women's health issues. And they also provide interpreters for those workshops. But the only thing is that you got to let them know before 48 hours in advance, or else they won't be able to secure an interpreter. But the cost for those workshops is just $5, so it's a deal.
Well, yes. I've got information about that, and when I first received it, it was like, well,
Why?
I wonder if there'll be any other deaf women there. Do you think there'll be other deaf women? It's like, I felt that. If there were other women there, that's great. But, on a communication, for that aspect alone, I felt that I didn't really feel comfortable. It's always surface, superficial conversation, nice to meet you, but nothing in depth, no in-depth discussion. And I felt that it's an awkward situation. So I'd like to have the organization, and I'd like to know whether or not there'd be other deaf women going to be there. DWR doesn't have an office or a support group. So when announcements go out, we don't know that we can all go and that we'll be there. So, when a workshop is offered, how am I to know? I feel like, again, communication's an issue. There's an interpreter there, but still, like inside, you want that camaraderie and that ability to discuss the issue.
Right, you wish that maybe it could be a deaf presenter because you're deaf and you're women. If you had someone who was a deaf woman, you could relate on both your identities.
I'd prefer to have a deaf speaker would be the ultimate goal here. But at the same time, it'd be nice just to have deaf people there, other deaf women. And if not, it's like kind of forget it. Not you. No. Right.
So if it's just yourself, you won't go. You prefer a group.
Like my best friends, like 2 or 3 or 4 of us to go, that would be much better than, one meeting, me as a stranger, meeting all these strangers.
Do you feel the same way?
Yes, I agree with Barbara. If there was a few of us, I would be more willing to go.
Have you gone to any of these meetings?
Well, no, I haven't attended any yet. I have planned to attend a few, but I always have a conflict with my schedule because I'm involved in so many other things. But I do think they're a great idea, support groups. Women getting together and being able to share and get things off their chest. And it's the same, within the deaf community. I prefer communicating with a group of deaf people because the communication just flows better. They understand me better. And it's just a more successful experience. The communication is the key there. And it's the same with deaf women's groups. They need this support. It's like men who get together and go fishing, or they go to football games together. It's the same idea.
Thelma, would you like to add something?
Well, talking about getting a deaf presenter to come in, obviously that would be ideal, but it's hard to find somebody who has expertise on various topics. So most of the time they do get hearing presenters, but once in a while in the workshop, they also even get men presenters in, but that's not so bad.
Men talking about women issues? Do you feel you have a rapport with men?
Well, men who know a lot about women's issues, I feel fine about that.
I'd like to ask you something. I'm thinking about the issue of how men oppress women. Do you think there's a difference in the degree of oppression between deaf men and hearing men?
The oppression of hearing men or deaf men who oppresses me more. I think it's the same. But maybe I think hearing men tend to oppress more than deaf. And I think it's the communication is the problem there. I think but basically I do think they oppress women the same. That's my opinion.
Okay, what about you?
Oppression. Oh, you mean in the work environment?
Generally. Okay, it can be in the workplace. But what do you think? What about in the workplace?
Well, I feel at work that deaf women compared with deaf men, right? You're talking about...
Okay, I mean, suppose that you're working with a deaf man and a hearing man. Which one do you think would oppress you more? Is there a difference?
Well, yes, I do think there is a difference because with deaf men, we have a commonality in that we're both deaf.
Well, right. I know that deaf people are oppressed. That's a given. But I mean the difference between the men. Do you think that a deaf man oppresses you just because you're a woman?
I really don't think so.
Well, I guess that means your husband must be sensitive to women issues.
Yes, he is.
Okay. How about you, Barbara?
That's difficult to answer.
I wonder, is your husband sensitive to your feelings? Does he want you to stay home, or does he prefer that you're working, for example?
Well, I remember I've worked at NTID for 14 years, National Technical Institute for the Deaf, and just recently I had a baby boy, and my son is now 6 months old. And I told my husband that I had made a decision to stay home. And he says, "Oh, no, you're going back to work." And I thought, well, no, wait a minute. I've decided I've already worked 14 years of service to NTID, which is enough, and I want to see what the experiences of staying home is like. And he says, "No, go to work." And I said, enough. I've decided I'm staying home, and I'm taking a leave of absence. And he finally acquiesced and accepted it as that being what I wanted. But it was very hard for him, really, because the tradition was that his mother, who has been a teacher at a school for the deaf for more than 40 years, and he'd always looked up to his mother as a working woman. She had never stayed home as a housewife taking care of children. So that inside of me, I felt like I was going to be working forever. He thought I should, like his mother, but that's, up to him. But he finally accepted it and had to accept that and respect my decision, and I thanked him for that. Financially, it's like, yes. One thing I missed was the news and the gossip that was going on, that you always get when you're on the job. But life goes on here.
I guess maybe if you didn't like your job, it'd be a different story, but you do like your job.
That's true.
A long time ago, it used to be that all men preferred their wives to stay home, and now things seem to be changing. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think that one thing that's an easy thing to answer is income. The cost of living is just ridiculously growing and ever increasing, and in order to keep up and to maintain our lifestyle, in the past, for example, I think it was like, 5-cent stamp.
Oh, I agree with you.
The stamp was 5 cents, and that went on, and then there was this huge increase. And now, the cost of food is, up and down and ever increasing as well. So many people, in order to have a house, have to have a 2-income family. You can't do it alone. And I think that's probably the basis of it.
And I think also that women who work out in the community, work out in the world, are more interesting people than women who stay at home. I stayed at home with my children until my youngest was 14 years of age. And then I went back to work. And my husband thought that I was a much more interesting person when I was out in the workplace, because I was socializing and learning things and bringing what I learned home and sharing it with him. And yes,
it's the same idea as what Barbara said. You get to keep up on the news.
Well, yeah, as a housewife, a lot of people think that that's no good and not worth it. But, and they put it down. But I'll definitely have great respect for them. Taking care of children, I thank them for taking care of my children if I have to, rather than taking them somewhere in daycare. A housewife is valuable.
Okay, it's now time for a commercial break. Please stay tuned, though. When we come back, we'll have some questions from the audience. Before I let the audience ask some questions, I'd like the women to tell us their jobs. Barbara is an associate professor of sign language, and Thelma also teaches sign language. We work, all three of us actually, in the same department. And Mindy works in the Department of Human Development.
Cross-cultural educator.
Oh, I see. Okay, cross-cultural educator. Thank you. Thank you all for telling me
That's all right.
your jobs.
If I might excuse me, I'm not an associate professor. I'm an assistant.
Oh, an assistant. Thank you. I'm sorry.
And the assistant chairperson for the department as well.
That's right. I knew that. Excuse me. Okay, now we're going to let some people from the audience ask some questions.
Now, looking on deaf women's issues and speakers, I'm wondering if any of you have been involved in political activities such as the pro-choice or the pro-life movement, some of the protests that have been happening to date. What is your opinion about deaf women being involved in those issues?
Those, I don't know where that they occur. I've never seen them in the newspaper or spoken about in deaf groups, but I guess, to each its own. I've never been involved myself because of the communication. There's no provision for interpreters, and I'm unable to participate fully.
Where have you received your training in assertiveness? Why, perhaps, haven't you been more involved?
I can't. Well, for one, I'm just torn. I am involved and concentrate in sign language teaching. I'm a mother of 2 children, and I can't be just overly involved in too much.
How do you feel about that, Thelma?
Well, I think that it's all very interesting, but just like Barbara, I'm involved with too many things right now.
I think it's good if you want to be an advocate and be in some of these political organizations and the political movements going on. And we're involved in other things, and we spread it all around, and I think it helps everyone.
Okay, and for our next question, this is from a man.
If you were earning a higher wage than your husband, should your husband possibly stay at home with the children?
Well, ladies?
Well, I'm sorry, but my husband is unable to care for the children because he can't change the diapers, so
I see.
Leaves him out.
And also, breastfeeding or nursing the baby. A man can't really do that. It's the nature's way of feeding a child, and I agree with it. I don't really like formulas and stuff. So it'd be difficult for a husband to do that. But other than that, I support the idea. It's up to the husband, whatever he wants, and they can work out whatever's best for them.
I see. And you, Thelma?
Well, because of the high cost of living, my husband would have to keep on working.
Well, who would watch the children? Someone needs to watch the children.
Well, I guess we'd have to send them to daycare.
I see. Thank you. I disagree with Barbara Ray's comments, and I agree with what Thelma had to say about the workshops at Highland Hospital. I've been to a couple of those meetings, and the lecturers themselves tend to be men in hearing, and they know quite a bit about what they're talking about, and I've received much communication and feedback with all the people there. And I didn't have to depend on just my deaf women friends to go with. We can go to those workshops at Highland and not have to depend on just deaf people. It's good to just be yourself, and you can learn quite a bit.
Right. Oh, I think you misunderstood me. I would go and have gone, if there was an interpreter. But going alone doesn't appeal to me. I would feel more comfortable if there were 2 or 3 of us rather than going alone. I'm speaking about my comfort level. I'm not against it, and having interpreters and being with hearing women there at the conference.
Well, you don't have to wait for other deaf people to go. You can just go on your own and be independent. I think you get much more benefit that way.
I understand. You're right, and I would agree. I need to be more assertive. I think that's fantastic. I'm going to have assertiveness training.
Okay, thank you.
I'm curious. I'd like to know about women who work and earn a wage more than men. Who in the house has more power? Who has more authority?
Wow, that's a good question. Really a good question.
Do the women?
Well, I have an example in my family. My father earned more than my mother, But in our house, my mother was definitely the boss, and she held those reins tight. No problem. I think the important thing is to respect each other and to work together, and everything will turn out fine.
Well, that's a good question. I let my husband do the things, in managing the budget. I'm not interested at all in paying bills. So I allow my husband, let him go to it. I don't want to have anything to do with the financial aspects.
Suppose a man has difficulty earning an income, or the woman makes more than the man does. Could the man stay home and watch the children?
Well, I think that it would depend on the individuals involved. My husband certainly could take care of our children. He'd have no problem, and I'd have no problem letting him do that.
Most couples seem to both work. I noticed that in the United States. They both are wage earners. And only a few stay home, perhaps 30%. But these women that are working, I don't see them out in the workplace. I mean, there's a mortgage they have to pay for and all the other bills. I wonder how they're hidden. I just don't see them. How do you know, that these women are out there actually working?
Well, maybe it's because as women, when they were girls growing up, they've always wanted to work out in the work world. They've had career goals all their life inside of them that they really wanted to achieve. And so that's something they need to work out with their husband, something they need to agree on to have a 50-50 relationship. And otherwise, housewives, I really applaud them. I think it's a difficult job to stay home and take care of children, and I really commend these women who stay home and take care of their children. It's a 24-hour-a-day job. It's tough, and it really depends on the individual.
Well,
excuse me. I think we need to let someone else ask a question now. Thank you.
I see. Thank you. Hi. I've noticed that all of you women work at NTID, where people are more sensitive and have services for deaf people. There's more opportunity for deaf people to get good positions. I wonder if any of you have made the effort to work out in other places, in companies around the country where there's deaf people haven't made it into such high positions. Or have you just decided not to encounter that kind of discrimination?
Well, you're saying that NTID is very accepting of the deaf and very sensitive. They're not necessarily. There are areas where they're not sensitive to the needs of deaf. Outside of NTID, perhaps they're more. It's more of a challenge to enter the market. But at NTID, they're more sensitive? No, I wouldn't agree necessarily. I think that maybe I'm frightened to apply outside of this environment because at NTID I know the environment, I know it, so I've avoided the problem. But I think that it's wonderful that others have suffered the frustration of trying to enter the job market elsewhere.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I'd like to comment about an experience that I had. You know that I used to work at Kodak, and it was very hard for me to even be hired by them. Why? Because I'm deaf. And even though I had studied in toxicology, they still struggled with whether or not they would hire me, and their only reason was that I was a deaf person. They finally seemed to be willing enough to let me work there. I did work for a while and then transferred to Long Island, where I worked with children who have AIDS. And at that time, again, I faced the fact that they did not want to hire me because of my deafness. So it is very hard out there to try and find employment. I think maybe it's getting a little bit easier, but it's still not where it should be.
I was wondering if you have any suggestions for us, people who have recently graduated from college. In developing a resume, should we put down that we're deaf, or should we just leave it off?
I think that it would behoove you to be honest on your resume, because if your future employer sees that you're deaf and then discriminates against you, you're protected against that from happening.
So you think we should put deaf on our resume and put that down clearly, but perhaps they might not even give me a chance to interview. They would see that I was deaf and find some way to discriminate against me, and I wouldn't know about it.
Right.
And I agree with you. I myself would not put it down on the resume, and then I'd go to the interview, and you really sell yourself in person.
Yes, there's something new, a new idea, a concept that's arisen, is not sending a written or typed resume, but a videotape where you're able to communicate and show yourself. I think that's better. I think that labeling yourself deaf on the resume should be eliminated.
This is a question for Mindy. You've talked about all the different sports that you're the best at and everything, and I was wondering if I could challenge you sometime to some kind of support, perhaps, racquetball or something. We could have a match.
Hey, I accept your challenge.
Great. That'd be great.
Hey, you just give me a call and
Okay.
I'll play you anytime.
Okay, and maybe we'll report the results on the next show.
Yes, we'll announce it on the next episode of Hey Listen or something, and right across the screen that Mindy beat, I'm not sure of your name.
Okay, no problem.
Well, that's really good. So I guess we're going to have to announce on the next show who won the racquetball match, Mindy or Mike. Wow, it's going to be a hot game. Good luck to both of you. Now, don't blame me because of this show on deaf women, all right? It's not going to be my fault. It's now, again, time for a break for our commercials, and then we'll be right back. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to thank our guests, Barbara, Thelma, and Mindy, for being with us today. If you'd like your name to be in the sequel of Deaf Women, please send your comments and your submission to Mabs Holcomb. The address is P.O. Box 3334, Fremont, California. And I'm not sure of the zip code, but I do know that you can look in the directory at the post office and you can find all the zip codes and then mail it in. Make sure that you let them know soon because they're going to be publishing the second edition of Deaf Women. Thank you for being with us and hope you'll be with us again for Hey Listen. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.